My name is Nancy Fletcher. I turned 67 last October, though I sometimes forget that when I'm focused on a pattern or absorbed in a yarn sale online. The hands may grow stiffer with time, the knees may creak when I bend down to pick up a dropped needle, but the heart, it doesn't age in quite the same way. Not when it has something to love. And for me, that something has always been knitting. I started when I was 10. My grandmother taught me, sitting beside me in her old rocking chair, the light from the fireplace flickering across the wooden floors of our small farmhouse in Iowa. She'd hum tunes from the radio and murmur encouragements as I fumbled with my needles. I remember the warmth of her voice better than the exact pattern we practiced that day. It wasn't about getting it right. It was about getting it felt. That lesson stuck. Over the years, knitting became more than a hobby. It was my comfort, my meditation, my quiet way of pouring love into the world. When I met Harold, my late husband, he used to joke that he had to compete for attention with my yarn basket. And he wasn't entirely wrong, but he understood. Every winter, he proudly wore the thick cable knit sweaters I made him, never once complaining about the itch or the sometimes wonky cuffs. He'd tug at the collar, lean in close, and whisper, "You made this, Nance. Makes it better than anything money can buy." We were married for 42 years. We raised one child, our son, Mike. Harold was a quiet man, solid and kind, and he taught Mike everything about integrity, responsibility, and the importance of doing right even when no one's watching. But Harold passed 6 years ago, and sometimes I wonder if too much of his influence faded along with him. Since his death, my life has been still. Not empty, no. I have my days, my garden, my books, my knitting, my little group of church ladies who meet every Tuesday at the community center. But there is a silence to a house when you've loved someone for half a century and they're suddenly gone. It's not loud, that silence. It's the soft, ever-present hum of what's missing. Mike visits occasionally. He's a good boy in his way, successful, sharp, ambitious. He works in finance, lives in a sleek condo downtown, drives a polished electric car, and wears shirts that cost more than my entire grocery bill. He loves luxury. Names like Armani, Loro Piana, and Ferragamo trip off his tongue with the ease of someone who has long been fluent in that language. We talk, of course, about the weather, about his work, about the new restaurant he tried or the watch he just bought. But sometimes I sit across from him and see a man so far from the little boy who used to wear mismatched socks and beg for my chocolate chip cookies straight from the oven. He's polite, but distant. When he was young, I knitted him everything: tiny baby hats, scarves for school, Halloween costumes, even a green pullover with dinosaurs stitched across the front when he was 7 and obsessed with Jurassic Park. He wore those pieces like armor, running to me for comfort when the world was too loud or too cold. But somewhere along the way, my handmade things became unfashionable, unnecessary. I noticed the change when he was a teenager. He stopped wearing the scarves, then the hats. Then he'd accept gifts with a quiet, forced smile and a distracted, "Thanks, Mom." Now, years later, I still knit. Every day. I sit by the window in my modest home, classical music playing softly in the background, a cup of tea cooling beside me. The rhythm of the needles calms me. Stitch by stitch, row by row, I knit sweaters, mittens, shawls. Not for anyone specific, just for the joy of it, for the quiet magic of turning a ball of wool into something beautiful, something warm. I live alone. The house is tidy, filled with memories, photos on the mantelpiece, Harold in his favorite brown cardigan, Mike at 5 years old grinning in a rainbow hat I made. There's love in every corner, and in the absence of voices, there's still meaning. When Christmas drew near this year, I felt a tug at my heart. a need, a longing not just to celebrate the season, but to reach across the widening gap between my son and me. Maybe, just maybe, if I made something truly special for him, he would remember not just the sweater, but the love, the feeling, the warmth. So I chose my softest wool, a smoky gray blend with specks of deep blue, and began to knit. The pattern was elegant, the weave intricate. Every night I worked in silence, watching the fabric grow beneath my fingers. I imagined him wearing it, imagined the look of surprise and delight on his face. I imagined him pulling it over his designer shirt and saying, "Thanks, Mom. This is amazing." I wrapped it in tissue, tied it with navy ribbon, and placed it in a sturdy white box. It looked perfect. I had never been so proud of a gift, not because of the stitches, but because of the intention, the hope. I told myself, this Christmas will be different. Christmas morning came wrapped in frost and filtered sunlight. The world outside looked like a snow globe, white, hushed, and delicate. I stood at my window, the sweater box in my hands, watching as children dragged sleds down the sidewalk and neighbors carried wrapped gifts to their cars. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in second chances. Mike had invited me to his place this year, his sleek downtown condo with polished floors, high ceilings, and an automated fireplace that flickered even when the thermostat read 72. "We're having a little get-together," he'd said over the phone, his voice brisk, efficient. "Some colleagues, a few friends. It'll be good for you to come." He didn't say it, but I heard it. "Be on your best behavior, Mom. Try not to talk too much. Don't embarrass me." I dressed carefully, an emerald green blouse, my wool skirt, and the brooch Harold had given me for our 25th anniversary. I curled my hair and wore a touch of lipstick, hoping to look polished, not old. And I took the sweater, my gift for Mike, carrying it as if it were made of glass. His condo was full of laughter and expensive cologne. Men in tailored jackets and women in satin blouses clinked wine glasses and talked about market trends and skiing in Aspen. I recognized no one, and no one looked twice at me. I wasn't offended. I'd stopped expecting much in that department. Mike greeted me with a quick hug and a distracted, "Glad you could make it, Mom," before darting off to refill someone's champagne flute. I stood near the marble kitchen island, trying not to fidget. After some time, I approached him and said gently, "Mike, I have something for you." He turned, glanced down at the box in my hands, and smiled politely. "A gift?" "A sweater," I said, trying not to sound too hopeful. "I made it myself." I handed it to him, and he took it almost absently. "You didn't have to go to all that trouble." "It was no trouble," I said quickly. "I wanted to. I—" He was already unwrapping the ribbon. He peeled back the paper and lifted the sweater out by the shoulders. The room around us began to quiet just a little, conversations softening. He held it up, looked at it, then at me. And then he grinned, not with delight, not with appreciation, but with amusement. "Mom," he said, his voice light but loud enough to carry across the room, "you shouldn't have gone to all that trouble. I'm not going to wear something like that anyway." There was laughter, not cruel, but sharp, quick, easy, the kind people use when they don't know what else to do. Some of his friends looked at the sweater and smiled awkwardly. Others looked away. I stood frozen, sweaterless, holding only the box. I saw the flicker in Mike's eyes, the recognition, the smallest wince, but he didn't say anything else. He handed the sweater back to me as if he were returning a receipt and turned to pour himself another drink. I stood there, my hands trembling just slightly as I folded the sweater back into the tissue paper. A lump swelled in my throat, but I didn't let it rise. No one said anything. No one came forward. The room reabsorbed me like a wave pulling back to sea, And so I did the only thing I could. I walked quietly toward the kitchen, sat down at the edge of the granite counter, and folded my hands. They laughed again, about something else this time, and the music turned back up. I could have been a painting on the wall for all the notice anyone took of me. I sat there for another half hour, maybe longer. I didn't remember most of what I heard. Conversations blurred together, vacation homes, stocks, a funny story about someone's dog. But my ears rang with that one line. I'm not going to wear something like that anyway. Eventually, I stood, found my coat, and left without a sound. No one stopped me. No one asked. I walked out into the cold, the sky inked with twilight, my breath puffing out in small clouds. The box was under my arm again, still neatly tied, still full of all the love I'd meant to give. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry, not out loud. But the ache settled in my chest like frost creeping across a window pane. It would not melt easily. The house welcomed me back with a silence so deep it felt like a presence. I hung up my coat, placed the box gently on the kitchen table, and stood there a long time. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere far away, fireworks popped faintly over the city skyline. I lit a lamp. Warm light spilled over the table, catching the shimmer of the navy ribbon still wrapped around the white box. My fingers moved automatically, untying it, as if by habit I needed to undo what had just been done. The sweater lay exactly as I had folded it, smooth, unmarred, never worn. I reached out and ran my hand over the fabric. My stitches were even, the pattern clean. It was one of the finest pieces I'd ever made. And yet, in that moment, it felt like a failure. I carried it to the armchair near the window and sat down slowly. The street outside was quiet now, save for the crunch of a few tires on snow. Across the road, the Jenkins house blinked with colorful Christmas lights, and someone's dog barked once, twice, then went silent. I sat there for hours, not crying, not brooding, just breathing. I remembered every hour I'd spent on the sweater, the time I'd spent choosing the yarn, the little pause I always make before starting the neckline, to say a silent wish, something my grandmother taught me. This time, I had whispered, "Let him feel how much I love him. Let it wrap around him when I'm not there." And yet, the hurt wasn't sharp. It didn't pierce like a needle. It was heavier than that, duller, like trying to move through water that's turned to ice. I thought back to when Mike was a boy, how he used to run to me after school, his cheeks flushed, his backpack swinging. "Mom, look what I drew today," he'd say, holding up a crumpled paper with stars and dragons and stick figure heroes. I'd always put them on the fridge, always. He'd been proud of his creations then, and I had been proud of mine. But something had shifted. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing what I made as a gift and started seeing it as something else, something outdated, embarrassing. Still, I wasn't angry with him. Not really. Disappointed, yes. Bruised, certainly. But not angry. He was shaped by a world that praised polish over patience, labels over love, a world that forgot the worth of handmade things and the hands that made them. I looked down at my own, wrinkled, veined, still steady, still capable. That was the moment. Not grand, not cinematic, just a quiet, crystalline realization. I won't force love where it's not welcome, but I will keep making it. I stood, set the sweater on the back of the armchair, and turned on the old desktop computer in the corner of the room. It blinked awake slowly, as if surprised to be summoned on Christmas night. I opened the browser. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "How to sell hand-knitted items online." The first link was Etsy. I clicked, signed up, chose a username, Warm by Nancy. I didn't have fancy photography equipment, but I had good lighting and clean tabletops. I took the sweater, laid it out on my kitchen counter, and photographed it with my phone. Then another, with it draped over a wooden chair. Then one more, folded neatly beside a mug of tea and a pine cone, like something from a catalog. I uploaded the photos, wrote a description: hand-knitted men's sweater, smoky gray wool with navy specks, made with care and warmth by a lifelong knitter, one of a kind. I didn't expect anything. I just wanted it out there. I wanted it to be wanted. Before bed, I lit a single candle. Not for Christmas, not for hope, but for peace. Then I folded the sweater once more, tucked it back into the box, and placed it by the door, ready for wherever it would go next. And finally, I went to sleep without tears, just silence. But this time, it didn't feel so lonely. It felt like a beginning. The morning after Christmas was unusually still. Snow blanketed the trees like cotton, and the roads were untouched, smooth as frosting. I woke before dawn and lay in bed, listening to the soft creaks of the house settling. There was a kind of hush in the air, a pause between what was and what could be. I didn't open presents. There weren't any. The only gift I had prepared now sat on a kitchen chair, still folded, still full of unspent warmth. But something had shifted in me overnight. I brewed a pot of coffee, stronger than usual. It filled the house with its rich, familiar aroma. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself, the one Harold used to call my working robe, and sat at the kitchen table with my old notepad. I made a list, not a resolution list. Those were for younger people. This was a plan, a quiet, deliberate outline of how I would start, not because I wanted to prove something, not because I needed applause, because I needed purpose. At the top of the list, I wrote, use what I have, love what I do. I went through my drawers and cupboards, yarn in every shade, soft pastels, earthy browns, jewel tones. Some had been waiting for years for a project worthy of them. I pulled out 5 half-completed scarves, 2 baby hats, and a pair of mittens missing their match. I laid them out like an artist reviewing a forgotten gallery. That afternoon, I created 3 more listings on Etsy. I wrote each one carefully. Soft teal scarf, handmade with alpine wool. Wrap yourself in warmth. Crimson mittens, double-stitched. Perfect for long walks and hot chocolate. Baby hat, cloud soft yarn. For the tiniest heads, made with the biggest love. I hesitated before publishing, not because I doubted the items, no, they were lovely, but because it felt like opening a door I wasn't sure anyone would walk through. Still, I clicked publish. Then I waited and knit. The sweater I started that night wasn't for anyone in particular. It was a deep plum color, a shade I'd never used before. The yarn had a silk blend, smooth, luxurious, not showy, but quietly rich. With each stitch, I thought less about who would wear it and more about what I was feeling as I made it. Peace, anticipation, quiet defiance. The next morning, there was a message. A woman from Minnesota had bought the gray sweater. She left a note. My son's birthday is next week. He's in college studying abroad. He always gets cold. This looks perfect. Thank you. I read it twice, then a third time. I wrapped the sweater carefully, with a handwritten note inside. I made this sweater with care, hoping it would bring someone warmth, not just from the wool, but from the heart. I hope it finds him well. Nancy. At the post office, I handed it over with both hands. As the clerk printed the label, I felt a small but certain joy. Something I made would go out into the world, to someone who wanted it. That night, I updated my inventory. 3 new people followed my store. The plum sweater was taking shape quickly now. I added a subtle diamond pattern across the chest, not obvious but detailed. something for the eye to notice on a second glance. I received another message. Do you take custom requests? I'd love a winter scarf like the one in your photo, but in forest green. I replied, yes, I'd love to make it. And I meant it. The house felt warmer, though I hadn't adjusted the thermostat. I kept the radio on in the evenings, soft jazz or old ballads. I smiled more when I looked at Harold's picture, not because I missed him less, but because I felt for the first time in years like I was growing again. I wasn't just knitting, I was reaching, and somewhere, maybe even somewhere close, someone was listening. By the second week of January, my living room no longer resembled the tidy, modest space it had been during the holidays. It had transformed into something closer to a workshop. Yarn baskets under the coffee table, patterned printouts stacked beside my knitting needles, a small dry erase board on the wall where I kept track of orders. It was quiet chaos, and I loved it. The orders kept coming. At first, 1 or 2 a week, then 5, then 10. People left messages, real, heartfelt notes. My grandmother used to knit like this. Your work brought her back to me. This is for my daughter, who's going away to college. I wanted her to have something made with care. Your stitches are so even. It's like poetry in wool. I read each message like a letter from a long-lost friend. I answered them all, always personally, always warmly. These weren't just customers. They were people looking for something real in a world full of fast, fake things. And somehow, my hands were giving them that. I named the new pieces as if they were old friends. The Maplewood shawl, the Pine Hollow pullover, the first snow beanie. The names came from memories, from places Harold and I had traveled, from books I loved as a girl. Each stitch had a story. I think that's what people felt, even if they didn't know it. One morning in February, I opened my inbox to find a message from someone named Clara Roberts. I didn't recognize the name, but the subject line read, Story Inquiry, Community Feature Column. My heart skipped. Clara was a freelance writer for the Hillford Weekly, a local paper I hadn't read in years. She'd found my shop by accident, she said. Her niece had received one of my scarves as a birthday gift and posted it on Instagram. Clara followed the tag, then followed the shop, then messaged me. Would you be open to an interview? She asked. You have such a unique story. I think our readers would love to meet the woman behind the wool. I agreed, cautiously. We met at a cafe near the post office, neutral ground. Clara was warm, curious, maybe in her 40s, and reminded me of someone I used to work with at the library. She asked thoughtful questions, not just about knitting, but about life. Why do you think people respond so strongly to what you make? She asked. I thought about that for a long moment, then said, because in a world where things are rushed, I offer something slow, something that takes time and love. She smiled. That's exactly the quote I was hoping for. The article came out the next week. Warm by Nancy, the grandma who conquered the internet with her needles and heart. There was a photo of me at my table, holding a skein of yarn, a soft smile on my face. I didn't hate the photo. That was a small miracle in itself. The response was immediate. My Etsy notifications pinged so frequently, I had to silence my phone. People from other states began messaging me. One woman from Oregon asked if I'd ever considered teaching an online class. A man in Boston wanted matching scarves for his entire family. I was stunned, grateful, overwhelmed, energized. But I wasn't alone. My neighbor, Linda, started coming by on Mondays to help me pack orders. She was quick with a tape gun and had a knack for arranging boxes just right. We'd chat as we worked, about her grandkids, about recipes, about the old days, and I kept knitting. Every evening, with the radio low and the fire flickering, I'd sit in my chair and return to the rhythm I'd known all my life. Stitch, stitch, breathe. Some nights I'd think of Mike, not with bitterness, but with a distant kind of curiosity. I wondered if he'd seen the article, if he'd recognized me. I didn't expect him to. He lived in a world of sharp edges and straight lines. Mine had softened, curved, and stretched. Still, something inside me had shifted since that sweater. I no longer waited for his approval, and that, I realized, was its own kind of success. It was early March when I saw Mike again. The snow had mostly melted, and the sidewalks were slick with thawed grit and water. I'd just dropped off 2 parcels at the post office, one heading to New Mexico, the other to Toronto, and decided to treat myself to a chai latte at the little cafe near 7th and Pine. It wasn't fancy, but the baristas knew my name and always smiled like they meant it. I was waiting by the counter when the bell above the door jingled. I turned my head on instinct. And there he was, my son, Mike. He looked the same. Tailored coat, leather gloves, sleek haircut, sunglasses tucked into the neck of his shirt. Confident, polished. Tired, though. I could see it in the way he carried his shoulders, like the weight of the world had quietly settled into his posture. He didn't see me right away. He was with someone, another man, younger maybe, in a thick green sweater that I noticed immediately. Not because of the color, but because of the stitch work, the pattern across the chest, the slightly off-center seam I remembered fussing over late one night in January. That sweater, that was mine. I blinked, stunned. The younger man, tall, bearded, cheerful, laughed at something Mike said and adjusted the sleeves. "Seriously, man," he said loud enough for me to hear, "this is the warmest thing I've ever worn. I don't know who this Nancy lady is, but she's a legend. My girlfriend found her shop on Etsy." Mike froze mid-laugh. He turned his head slightly, his eyes moving to the sweater, then over to the corner of the cafe. Where I stood, our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. The barista handed me my cup, but I barely registered it. My hand tightened around the lid. Mike looked away, said something to his friend, and the man gave a cheerful wave and headed toward the counter. Then slowly, Mike walked over to me. "Hi," he said after a moment. "Hi." He nodded toward the man. "That sweater, is that—" "Yes," I said quietly. "One of mine." He looked at it again. "I thought it looked familiar. I mean, I didn't realize. I've seen that stitch before." I smiled faintly, sipping my chai. "You never really looked at the stitches before." He ran a hand through his hair. "Guess not." There was an awkward silence, the kind that stretches like taffy when people don't know how to step back across a bridge they burned without noticing. "It's popular," he said finally. "Your shop, it's doing well?" "Well enough to keep my hands busy." He looked like he wanted to say more. Apologize, maybe. Ask something. But pride is a stubborn thing, and we were both still wrapped in our own versions of it. "Still," he said, "that article, the one in the weekly, I saw it. A colleague sent it to me. I didn't know." "Most people don't," I said, not unkindly. He nodded again, eyes on the sleeve of the green sweater. "I should get going," he said. "Client meeting." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "It's really beautiful work, Mom." I looked at him, not through the lens of disappointment or hope, but with a new kind of clarity, one that comes after long nights and small victories. "Thank you, Mike," I said. "That means something." He nodded once, then walked away. Not rushed, not proud, just quiet. I sat down at a corner table with my chai. My fingers itched for needles. I pulled out a skein of soft rose wool from my bag and began a new hat. Outside, the clouds broke apart just enough to let a sliver of sunlight touch the window. It wasn't a resolution, but it was, perhaps, the start of a new row. It was a week later when Mike came to my door. I had just finished blocking a new wool cardigan and was preparing to photograph it when I heard the doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone. Linda usually texted first, and I wasn't scheduled to ship any new orders until the next morning. When I opened the door, he was standing there, my son, in his charcoal coat, looking somehow both polished and uncertain. He held nothing in his hands. "Hi," he said. "Hi. Can I come in?" I hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. "Of course." He stepped into the warmth of my small home, looking around as though it were a place he hadn't seen in years. In truth, it had been months since his last visit, maybe longer. I gestured toward the armchair. "Sit down if you'd like. I'll make tea." "I don't need tea," he said quickly, then softened his tone. "But, sure, if you're making it." I busied myself in the kitchen while he sat, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like someone preparing to confess something. The kettle whistled just as he took a breath. "I saw more of your stuff," he said. I placed the cups on the table and raised my eyebrows. "Oh?" "Everyone at work is talking about it. People are actually trading links to your shop like it's some kind of boutique drop." He gave a short, uncertain laugh. "I didn't realize how big it had gotten." "It's not big," I said quietly, sitting across from him. "Just steady and real." He sipped the tea, nodded slowly, then looked directly at me. "Is it really yours?" he asked. "All of it?" "Yes." "The sweaters, the designs, the packaging, the messages?" "Yes." He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "I was so wrong. I didn't get it. When you gave me that sweater, I thought—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need him to. I knew what he thought. That it was quaint, that it was a relic, that it didn't belong in his world. "I didn't think it was important," he said finally. I stirred my tea. "It was never about importance, Mike. It was about love." He lowered his head. "I didn't mean to humiliate you that night," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how loud I was, or how quiet you became afterward." I took a breath, measuring my response not with emotion, but with clarity. "You didn't have to humiliate me. That part just happened on its own." He winced, nodded. "I think I was ashamed," he said, "of how simple it was, how much care it had. I wasn't used to that. I'm not proud of it." I let the silence sit. I wanted him to feel the space, the weight of what he was saying, not for guilt's sake, but for understanding. "I started something," I said softly. "Not because of what you said, but because of what I realized afterward. I had spent years giving love quietly, hoping someone would recognize it. But love isn't about being seen. It's about choosing to keep giving, even when it's not returned." He blinked quickly, his jaw tightened. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. I gave him a long look. "No one ever really does. We just get lucky when it's offered anyway." He sat back, let out a breath. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I know." He nodded. There were no tears, no dramatic gestures, just a raw, honest stillness. After a few minutes, he stood. "Thank you for letting me say that," he said. "Thank you for coming to say it." He lingered by the door. "Your place smells like cedar and cinnamon," he said suddenly, "like it always did when I was a kid." I smiled. "Some things don't need to change." He left, hands in his pockets, shoulders straighter than when he'd arrived. I stood at the door for a while, looking out as he disappeared down the path. There were words still unsaid. But that was okay. Not everything needs to be spoken to be understood. March gave way to April, and April bloomed into May. My fingers moved with more ease than they had in years, as if they too had shed something cold and heavy. The orders remained steady, and I developed a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Mornings for packaging, afternoons for knitting, evenings for tea and quiet reflection. It was a Tuesday when Mike returned. I was in the backyard garden, coaxing the daffodils into blooming, when I heard the gate creak open. Mom? His voice was softer this time. I turned and smiled. You're becoming a regular. He held a paper bag in one hand. I brought scones. From that place on Main you used to love. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the gate wider. I hope you brought enough butter. We sat in the kitchen, the sunlight pouring in from the side window, making the steam from our mugs look almost golden. We didn't talk much, not right away, just chewed quietly and watched a finch land on the fence post. Then, after a long pause, he set his cup down and looked at me. I'd like to ask you for something. I raised an eyebrow. All right. A sweater, he said. I blinked. He didn't smile when he said it. He wasn't joking. I know there's a waiting list, he added quickly. I saw your shop page. Some items say 4 to 6 weeks now, but when you have time, I'd like one, made by you. I looked at him, really looked at him. Not as a boy, not as a disappointment, but as a man sitting in front of me, humbled, honest, hopeful. What color? I asked. He let out a breath. Navy, like the one Dad used to wear. I felt something warm break open inside me. Not painful, just full. And the pattern? I asked. I trust you, he said. I nodded slowly, then stood up and walked over to the sideboard. I pulled open a drawer and retrieved my notebook, where I kept sketches and yarn swatches. The line is long, I said, sitting back down and flipping to a fresh page, but I'll try to make it in time. For what? He asked. I smiled. For your birthday, unless you're too old for that now. He chuckled. Not too old, just too used to forgetting what matters. We chose the yarn together that day. He held it in his hands like it was something sacred, something valuable not for the brand, but for the history woven into every strand. I didn't feel pain anymore, just peace. It wasn't about approval. It never had been. This was about returning to a place where love didn't have to shout. It could be quiet, steady, strong. As he left that afternoon, he turned and looked at the garden. Dad planted those daffodils, he said. I nodded. They come back every year, even after harsh winters. He paused, then said, like you. I watched him walk down the path, the sun warm on my back, and picked up my needles. It was time to begin. The year turned slowly, as it always does, but it brought with it a steadiness I hadn't known in years. Fall came with golden trees and cozy nights. Winter followed with brisk air and early darkness. Through it all, I kept knitting. And I kept my promise. The sweater for Mike took me 5 weeks. I used deep navy wool, soft, dense, with a gentle sheen that caught the light in the most subtle way. The pattern I chose was one I hadn't used in decades, something my grandmother taught me long before Mike was born. Interwoven braids down the sleeves, a subtle basket weave across the chest, and ribbing that stretched just enough to fit snug but comfortably. I wrapped it in tissue again, tied a ribbon, this time a rich warm gold, and placed it in a box just slightly bigger than the last. I didn't call ahead. This time, I waited for Christmas Day. Mike had invited me again. Only this time, it wasn't a party of strangers and wine glasses. It was family. His girlfriend, Claire, greeted me with a genuine hug at the door. He's been talking about your visit all week, she whispered. I stepped into the living room, and there it was, a tree, tall and fragrant, decorated with ornaments that looked both expensive and lovingly placed, and beside it, on the mantel, a single photo in a modest wooden frame. Me and Harold, Christmas 1987, both of us in hand-knitted sweaters. Mike appeared a moment later, grinning. You made it. Of course, I said. I brought something. I handed him the box. Same hands, different heart. He opened it slowly, carefully, reverently. When he lifted the sweater out, he didn't say anything right away. He ran his hands across the fabric, eyes tracing the stitches like they were a story written in wool. Then, without a word, he slipped it on. It fit perfectly. The room was quiet for a moment, everyone looking at him, at me, at the thing between us that had mended. Wow, Claire said. Where can I get one? Another guest, a friend of Mike's I vaguely remembered from the year before, added, seriously, that looks incredible. Is it custom? Mike looked straight at me. My mom made it, he said, not sheepishly, not with apology, but with something like pride. And then he smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It was real. Later, after dinner, when the guests had filtered out and the dishes were stacked neatly in the sink, I sat in an armchair by the fire. The sweater still hugged Mike's shoulders as he brought me a cup of peppermint tea. He crouched down beside me, the firelight flickering across his face. You really are something, Mom, he said quietly. I chuckled. You're only just now realizing that? He laughed, then fell silent for a moment. I used to think love was measured in things, he said. What you could buy, where you lived, what people saw. And now? I asked. Now I know the most valuable things don't come with receipts. They come with time and intention and sweaters, apparently. I reached out, brushed a bit of lint off his sleeve. It's never been about the sweater, I said. It's about what's stitched into it. He leaned forward and kissed my cheek. Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas, Mike. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, slow, gentle. Inside, something long broken had quietly come back together. The last guest left just after 9. Their laughter echoed faintly down the hallway as the door clicked shut behind them. The apartment had quieted, save for the soft crackle of the fireplace and the hum of the dishwasher running its final cycle. Mike and I stood in the living room, the scent of cinnamon and pine still lingering in the air. Would you like another cup of tea? He asked. Only if you'll join me, I said. He nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. I sat on the same couch I'd once avoided, now feeling like a welcomed part of the home. My hands rested on my lap. My heart, for the first time in a long time, rested too. He returned with 2 mugs and handed me mine. Peppermint, just like before. Then he sat beside me, a little closer than usual, and stared into the fire. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, about love being in the stitches. I sipped my tea and waited. I used to think success was supposed to feel big, loud, impressive. I spent so many years trying to prove I was doing well, trying to get people to see me as someone worth admiring. But lately, I look at you and I see someone who creates value without seeking praise, who gives without keeping score. I smiled but said nothing. He turned toward me, eyes earnest. I'm sorry for all the years I didn't understand that, for dismissing what you do, for thinking what matters is what's expensive, not what's honest. I set my cup down and reached for his hand. You don't need to keep apologizing, Mike. But I want to, not because I feel guilty, but because I feel grateful. I squeezed his hand. Then, that's enough. He was quiet a moment, then said, You know, I wore this sweater to a team meeting last week. I raised an eyebrow. You did? He grinned. Half the room asked where I got it. The other half asked if I could get them one. I laughed. So now I'm a fashion icon? Better, he said. You're someone people want to carry around with them. Because what you make isn't just beautiful, it means something. I looked at him. My son, my boy. No longer a stranger in expensive clothes, but a man learning the weight and grace of humility. Do you know what your father used to say? I asked. Mike shook his head. The warmest things in life are never bought, they're built. He nodded slowly. He was right. We sat together in companionable silence, the kind that only comes after truth has been spoken and understood. Eventually, he stood and reached for the folded blanket on the armrest. "I think you should stay the night," he said. I looked at him, surprised. He shrugged. "It's snowing. The guest room's made. Claire already hoped you would." I stood and followed him down the hallway. The guest room was small, but warm. There was a fresh quilt on the bed, a carafe of water on the nightstand, and, folded at the foot of the bed, a new pair of slippers. "Thank you," I said. He paused in the doorway. "I know it took me too long, Mom, but I've learned that carrying your love, wearing it, is an honor." I smiled, heart full. "The important thing," I said softly, "is that you realized it. The rest doesn't matter anymore." He nodded once, then turned off the light. "Good night, Mom." "Good night, sweetheart." The door clicked shut, and I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the moment settle around me. Outside, snow danced under the streetlight. Inside, I felt known. And for the first time in years, the night held no ache. Only peace, only warmth, only love, stitched patiently back together.